This video is brought to you by my patrons and by viewers like you. Greetings, groovy people. Welcome to Blue Dragon Art. I'm the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. This is a channel where I discuss a lot of things, primarily art, indie comics, indie web comics, my own art process, my own comics, stuff like that. And this week I'm going to be talking about a couple different things regarding my free Not Safe for Work webcomic Dark Horse. The links for it are down in the description. Everything that I'm discussing is in relation to the pages that I'm working on in the background and the time lapse. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing in this video is to introduce or reintroduce, for those of you who are already reading Dark Horse, what my comic is. I'm going to try to keep that pretty brief. The second thing I'm going to do is explain why I am working on this 3-page introduction or prologue, prelude, whatever you want to call it. After that, I will thirdly be discussing some of the techniques that I'm using, some of the things that I'm combining as I work on this introduction to the comic. And I'll also is going to be released, I'll say that right now, it's going to be December 11th, but I'll also go into a little bit more detail and then have like my closer. So that's what you can expect from this video. Okay, let's go. So Dark Horse is my primary webcomic that I work on. I have a lot of different projects that I have on like the back burner or that I'm working on intermittently, but Dark Horse is my primary lifelong project, and I started it in like the early 2000s, sometime after I started college, probably around 2003, though ideas for characters and things started more so in like high school, but nothing serious until like the early 2000s when I was in college. And Dark Horse itself is the first in a series called the Crystal Lotus Chronicles. I'm not sure how many I'm going to have in the series. I kind of have roughly like 4, but I may end up shortening that depending on how I rewrite things once I finish this first part of the series. But Dark Horse basically follows 2 main characters, Rhiannon and Kana. They're best friends. They live in the Pacific Northwest, and essentially, they are confronted with somebody who has traveled back into the past from the future, who has described to them that the future is, post-apocalyptic. There's a major war started by a bunch of fascists, and the population of the planet just drastically is reduced, and it's Kana and some other magical girls and people who are trying to pull the pieces back together and defeat an evil demon that was awakened during that war that brought about not the end of the world, but like the end of the industrialized world, we'll say that. So that's basically like the idea behind it. It blends things that have influenced me for pretty much most of my life, which I'll get into a little bit later on in the video. The reason why I'm doing the 3 pages in the background is because, as I have mentioned in many other videos, I do take constructive criticism, and I should say, in years past, talked to quite a few people who are my peers that work on webcomics themselves. This was several years ago, probably back in like 2020 or something, when I got some critique from a contest that I had entered into on Tapas. Still talk to a lot of those people, I guess I would say friends with a lot of those people. So I value their input and have been trying to improve my art, in part based on, some of their recommendations. I also have had some critiques that were unsolicited, but I guess solicited because the person asked before, giving me very in-depth opinions on how they're reading and what they're picking up on and what they're not picking up on. And I really value that person's time. For the most part, they tried to be fair. For the most part, most of what they said was pretty legitimate in my opinion. There are some extraneous thoughts and ideas that they brought to the table that I disagree with. We had our back and forth, and I'm not entirely sure what happened to them, but they were taking their sweet, precious time giving me feedback. So if they don't want to waste their time on that anymore, that's like totally fine with me. I have no problem with them exercising their energy into something that's probably more profitable, more beneficial to themselves. But having said that, I know that they spent a lot of time reading and rereading and trying to understand like where I was going. And there are definitely a ton of really good suggestions and things brought to my attention that I have definitely been keeping in mind as I progress the story forward. And in the background, I decided that since eventually I am going to be working on a volume of 175, 180 pages, basically Acts 1 through 8, or maybe it's Acts 1 through 7. It's Acts 1 through 7 of Dark Horse. I want to make it into a tankobon or a single volume. And so I've been reviewing and rereading some of their criticisms and trying to rework the early pages, both my artwork, but also I'm not going to be like doing like a complete and total other revamp of the comic, of the story, but I am going to be editing and improving the artwork for this volume to put it on sale so that I believe it will be more worthy of people buying it. And I'm taking all the critique that I've received over the years, and not just critique, but like trying to discern from people's comments when they're getting something and when they're not getting something, trying to take that into mind, because while there's a lot of Easter eggs and little nods and symbolism that, for me personally, that is important to me personally, and I really don't care who does and doesn't get it. There's a lot of other things that I do want to make sure people are getting an understanding and is nuanced, but actually there, if all that makes sense. So this project is the start of me working on fixing up art, fixing up any like blinding issues that has been pointed out to me by various people, or, I've been led to believe needs clarification by various readers. And this is the start of it in the background. All right, so now we're on to the third goal that I had with this video, which is to kind of give you guys something that interests you, because some of you may be here for Dark Horse, and some of you may just be here to hear a rambling voice in the background while you work on your own art. And some of you may be here trying to like improve your craft and learn from other people who are struggling to improve their artwork and what they're doing. So this section is where I'm going to be talking about some of the techniques that I'm using in the pages, but also talk about some of the resources, the books that I have been reading or flipping through or have read in the past that have had an influence on where my art is at this point in time. Now, of course, you're going to see that I am doing a lot of cross-hatching. I have been attracted to cross-hatching for a very long time. When I was younger and in high school, I was always disappointed in how poorly I would cross-hatch and stipple. But I always wanted to be good at that, and I just don't think I had the patience at the time to kind of make myself sit down and learn how to do it. Even now, I definitely could improve on my cross-hatching at the very least, but I really like how that looks visually. Besides being like a fan of like woodcut artwork, I've also been like a fan of stuff that has like a lot of cross-hatching and things of that nature in it, like various ink techniques. So that's going to be like one of the most obvious techniques that I'm utilizing in the background. But the skill level at which I'm at now, I've been getting a lot of practice from working on one of my side projects, The Whimper in the Dark. I've kind of set that aside for now, but one of the primary goals with that project was to help improve my ability to use ink techniques so that I would have less screen toning that I would have to do. So I was using that side project for this skill. At the same time, though, I have been reading, and I've mentioned this book a billion times, Pen and Ink Drawing by Alphonso Dunn. I have since purchased a copy of the workbook, and I have been going through the practice workbook, basically, trying to help improve my ability to have even spaces between the strokes and work on my gradation and things of that nature. So that's one of the resources that I've used and I've mentioned on the channel several times. The other one that I've just mentioned in a video not that long ago that I'm still putting through. I'm very slow when it comes to reading because I take notes and I try to read intentionally so that I'm picking up on tips as I go and actually learning and retaining some of the shit that I read, you know what I'm saying? But one of those is How to Pen and Ink. That goes into like a little bit about like varying line width and different manga techniques that are utilized by mangaka. And that has been very helpful to me. In fact, I've been using like a lot of the techniques that are in that book. I think that one for sure is out of print. I have seen it. It's pretty expensive on eBay, but I think you might be able to get a copy or at least look at a copy on Internet Archives at the time of recording. And if not, you might be able to find it at like your local library or again, you might be able to order it somewhere online, but it's going to have to be a used copy because it is now out of print. The other thing that specific resource has been really helpful with is kind of guiding me through using physical screen tones or zip-a-tone or whatever you want to call them. I have a couple deleter sheets, and on the last page that's going to be time-lapsed in this video, I am working using just a small amount of physical screen tones. I'd like to use more of those in the future, but I did finally bite the bullet and get a copy of Clip Studio Paint. So I might be playing around with that very soon. I'm not sure how much I'm going to record of that. I will eventually probably do some screen recordings of working in there, but not at this time. I want to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more familiar with the program before I start recording shit. Some other techniques that I picked up from some of my different how to draw manga books. I used to get that series. If you know, you know. If you were around in like the early 2000s, those were like at Barnes & Noble. And I got quite a few of them. I don't have the whole collection, but I got quite a few of them. And blotting around the edges on the last page is one of those techniques that if you watch videos on my channel, I've used it before. I used it in chapter 13 that I'm just finishing up. It's probably going to be done by the time this video comes out, or maybe shortly after this video comes out, depending on which mirror you're reading it on, or if you're on the main website. But yeah, I've used this technique a couple times. There's a little bit of stippling too in the very last, like the tiny panel on the last page. But yeah, that is something, not the stippling so much, but the blotting has been something that I picked up from my How to Draw Manga books. Some of those you can find on Internet Archive. Again, most of those are out of print. I'm sorry, but you might be able to find them on eBay or at a used bookshop or something like that. A book that I don't talk about very often that I read back in maybe 2014 or 13, something like that. Back when I was living in Northern Illinois, I would spend a lot of time at the library because we got our internet turned off. We canceled it, I should say. It wasn't turned off. We canceled it because we couldn't afford it. And also, we didn't have air conditioning, so I spent a lot of time at the library. And one of the books that I had gotten a tip about from one of my webcomic associates, I don't know if it was one of the people that I'm friends with or if it was someone on Comic Fury, but it was suggested to me that I pick up a copy of Framed Ink. That book is by Mateu, Mestre, and you can find that on Internet Archives, and I'll link that, but I highly recommend books that you can get hard copy, you get a hard copy of. This is one of those books that I would like to have a hard copy of, and I'm definitely going to be rereading it because the book tackles composition, but the artist uses a lot of dark black ink blocks in order to create that composition. And in my opinion, he's very masterful at his craft. In addition to being like a graphic novel artist, I believe he's also in animation these days, at least, or maybe he has been in the past. But his artwork is really fucking amazing, and his use of ink and, I want to say, negative space as much as the positive space is just really impressive. And it's something that I want to try in some ways to channel in some of my art. Highly recommend that book, y'all. I can't really, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if you do a book review, which I have done some reviews or talked about how to draw art books on the channel, but to me, these are kind of things that, you know, people can suggest to you, but even having read like Scott McCloud at least twice, it's like the Bible of comics. I'm having a brain fart. I'll put it in the text. But it really is important to read it yourself and not just get the watered down version from other people. I'm not saying that anyone out there is doing that, but Scott McCloud's book is something that, like, even having read it twice, there's so much shit that I still haven't retained, haven't figured how to wrap my mind around, or I hadn't understood like this theory that comes first. And so I've probably been incapable of understanding things that build upon that theory or that comment or that chapter. So it's something that you really need to read and reread in order to really retain. It's not just something that you can like read once, and it's not like a story, you know, and even when you read a story, there's so much that you can pick up on when you reread it. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I don't want to like just always like reference that in so many of my videos, but that fucking animation is something that I watch over and over. I've never watched anything as many times except for when I was like a kid, you know, like Labyrinth or some shit like that. This series, as soon as I finish it, I restart it from the beginning. And each time I pick up or catch something new. That's how I feel about a lot of like instructive art books. If you're gonna really want to learn, until you've like mastered the craft, you really need to read and reread and practice. Put into practice and do it. In my humble opinion. Maybe you're someone that doesn't need to do that, but I think the majority of people benefit because our minds, there's just so much to know and remember, and memory is so bizarre. There's so much we don't know about memory that I don't think it's, you know, shocking or controversial to say that it's not that, you know, human memory isn't always that great. And so it's good to refresh and to keep reading like your materials. But now that's just me. Okay, you don't have to take my advice. You don't have to listen to what I'm saying. What the fuck do I know? Look at how long I've been working and I'm still not as good as I'd like to be. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't know. I will say that I didn't read most of those how to draw manga books. And this is me finally reading the books and trying to apply the shit that was in them instead of just looking at the pictures. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, you might get a leg up if you learn from that advice, or don't. It's up to you. It's your time. You need to invest it in what matters to you. So, whatever I say doesn't matter unless you want to apply it. I think that's about it regarding like the techniques. I did do a little bit of screen toning, which is not recorded, but I did a little bit of that in the computer using my typical screen tones. The other thing that I've upgraded is the font. My partner has much better handwriting than I do, even though I very carefully created the font that's currently used in Dark Horse. He was kind enough to go through and make a font for me that's way more legible. The kerning's better. He's better with that kind of shit than I am. So that's something else that I've started implementing within my redone version of the comic. And also paying attention to like how the eyes are. Like it's a rule. It's definitely a rule that you're supposed to use the serifs. The serifs are like they're like the little fancy things that stick out of like a letter when you have a serif font. But if you have sans serif, sans means to take away, I think, in Latin, or, you know, minus or something like that. Something along those lines. So sans serif eyes are used in the middle of words. And then the serif eyes typically in Western comics. The serif I's are used for the beginning of sentences and when you're saying I. I is something that they want, like, noticed. I could be wrong about having, like, the beginning of sentences have the serifed I. I could be wrong on that. I think it looks kind of weird to not whenever you're starting a sentence, but don't quote me on that. Maybe look that rule up on Blam. I will put the link for that down in the description too. It's a fantastic free resource for comic artists. Y'all, kablam, go there. Blambot, maybe? I can't remember. But I'll put the link for it. Whatever the fucking official name for it is. I can't remember. I'll float it in the text. But I'm going to put a link down there because there's like fonts that you can use. You don't have to create your own font. They have like free resources for fonts, bubble suggestions, all kinds of rules and stuff. It is a free resource. And if you want, I mean, you don't have to do it this way, but if it's something that you want to take, I don't even want to say like more seriously because I don't want to like insult people who aren't doing this because I sure as shit haven't been doing this. But if you wanted to take your comic, I guess, to like a new level and make it look a little bit more professional, they have like a lot of guidelines and rules that are like typical, at least of Western comic books. Okay, so moving along to the last or second to the last kind of topic that I wanted to tackle are some of my influences for the comic Dark Horse, things that I have found interesting throughout my whole life, different periods of my life. I don't want to go into too much detail about these because I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself because I've talked about this in other videos before. But if it is something that you guys out there want me to go in depth on, feel free to ask me. I did start a Dark Horse Origins playlist. These are old videos. However, having said that, it's not all encompassing. I didn't even get to do like my Full Metal Alchemist discussion. And there's a lot of other stuff that I really haven't covered in that because I didn't finish the series because I was like, I got other things I want to talk about. So, all of that said, Dark Horse is a post-apocalyptic magical girl fantasy. And the reason why I've combined these three genre tags is because those are the things that have been some of my primary interests, pretty much lifelong. When we're talking about fantasy, that's where it all started for me. I would read anything, but as a kid, I read a ton of books. We were signed up for different library programs to win prizes, but also to keep us entertained because we were from a small town. I actually lived in the country, but we would go to like the town that was like a few minutes away and we spent a lot of time reading at the library. I also did like Book It to get us like some free food. You'd read so many books, you'd get so many stars, and then you would get like a free little personal pan pizza. That was something that Pizza Hut used to do. And just my parents, like my dad wasn't like a huge reader, but he did read. He read poetry and stuff to us, and he read The Hobbit to us. My mom was a huge reader, is a huge reader, and she read to us also. And since she was the one who was home more than my dad was out of town a lot because of his job, she always stressed that we read a lot. We had to play outside, we had to exercise and do stuff like that. We weren't allowed to watch a ton of TV. Like, when I was real young, an hour of TV, that got more lax when we got older, but even then, we were not allowed to sit in the house and watch TV all day. We had to either read or go outside and do something, and then we were allowed to play a certain amount of either video games or watch a certain amount of TV. Either or. It wasn't both. So, I mean, and to be quite honest, I'm glad my mom did that because, kids can be like just enraptured by visual stimuli, and it's good for you to exercise different parts of your brain. While I would read any genre, fantasy was like my favorite genre when I was younger. Loved the Prelude Chronicles, loved the Enchanted Forest Chronicles. That was one of my primary influences. Dealing with dragons, searching for dragons, calling on dragons, and talking to dragons. That's what comprises the Enchanted Forest Chronicles. So, having the Enchanted Forest Chronicles and the Prelude Chronicles, which is like the Book of Three, the Black Cauldron, Castle of Lyre, I think, Taran Wanderer, the High King, those are all chronicles of fantasy written by authors that I think did a really good job of creating in-depth worlds and characters, and that had like a massive influence on me, which is none too surprisingly why when I started working on a comic, it ended up being like a chronicle, not just a single series, which is what I should have done. But, I was young when I started all this, and now the only way out is through. And I'm happy for that because I want to see this story through. So I think that covers fantasy. There's a lot of other stuff that I'm not talking about, but those were like some of my primary influences. Patricia C. Reedy, by the way, is a way better author, a way better fucking writer than someone like, J.K. Rowling. So if you are interested in reading some fun stories that's young adult, but also like not insulting to your intelligence, you should read that. You should read the Enchanted Forest Chronicles and possibly anything else written by Reedy, because she is very entertaining and somehow manages to not be a total fucking hateful person. Okay, I don't have anything nice to say about Rowling, so we're done with that. The post-apocalyptic genre tag is probably a little odd, I would think, combining with magical girls, aside from like when I think of something like Madoka Magica, because that was kind of like a deconstruction of the magical girl genre. The reason why that is one of the genres that I was interested in combining is because, so in 1994, I think it was 94, there was a miniseries that was on TV called The Stand. Now, 1994, I was in 4th grade. I'm not entirely certain why the fuck I was allowed to watch that series. Maybe because it was on TV, so like all the real bad stuff was censored. 90s was pretty conservative, as I don't know, like a lot of people have like rose-colored lenses on like their childhood and what the world was like. And it's like, I was like that, because I grew up with like LeVar Burton. I grew up with Wishbone. I grew up with Mr. Rogers and Bob Ross. So I thought things were like way more friendly and open-minded than they actually were. I was very shocked as I got older to realize that most people don't embrace the ideals of Mr. Rogers or any of my heroes. But having said that, yeah, I don't know why I was allowed to watch The Stand, but I did. And if you know anything about The Stand, it is a Stephen King novel. And it's basically a disease is released, a government-crafted disease is released, and it sets off the apocalypse. And the last remaining people are in a standoff battling, basically it's a battle between good and evil. And that, I was a Stephen King fan even as a kid because, like, we watched Stand By Me a billion times. That kind of kicked off, like, a little mini obsession for me of like Stephen King. Like I was not allowed to watch Carrie at that age. I didn't see that till high school, but I did watch like The Langoliers and like shit that was on TV. I think Tommyknockers was on TV. And again, when I was older, I was allowed to watch Pet Sematary. It was a little too violent, Mom thought, when I was younger, but when I got older, I could watch it. But The Stand really had an influence on me. The next thing that really, especially with like the comic, why I picked the genre of post-apocalyptic. In college, in Infotech, we watched the cinematic version of The Postman with Kevin Costner.
You're in Bridge City, where we don't allow guns.
I have since read the book. I like them both. I don't think the book is for everyone, but I definitely enjoyed the book. There are some things that are a little dated, but the dude was writing in the 80s and his heart was in the right place. The end is like an anime showdown. I'm not even going to talk about it, but it's very, very anime showdown. So I fucking love the 80s anime shit. So I enjoyed the end of the book, but I don't think a lot of other people did. I like ridiculous spectacle though. So, fictional, ridiculous spectacle. Let me clarify that. But The Postman, for those of you who aren't familiar, again, post-apocalyptic. There was an uprising and a civil war started in the United States. started by fascist. God, my voice is so hoarse, you guys. I've gotten over a cold, but my voice, I've just been having a hard time. I don't know what the fuck's going on. But you don't see the war in the film. You see the aftermath of it. And it's actually a pretty hopeful book. And that's what I really liked about the film and the book, is that it takes the worst of humankind, shows what we do to one another, but it also gives hope that there are still good people out there trying to pick up the pieces, trying to make life easier and bring us back to, a culture that cares for one another and can feed, everyone and can take care of one another. So that film had a really big influence on me. And I don't know if it was in that class, Infotech, or if it was in one of my biology courses, but we also read a book, Flu, The Flu of 1918, or The Swine Flu of 1918 by Gina, Kolata. And again, I know I've talked about that a little bit on this channel before, but that book is nonfiction. It's an actual researched book about the swine flu, which was a pandemic, and it killed a massive amount of people. Now, when we had our own pandemic in the 21st century, a lot of people would reference the swine flu and talk about, things that were going on, like historically, show like political cartoons from the time period and things of that nature. That book specifically was talking about a virus that jumped from animal agriculture and how it jumped from pigs to people. And spread like a wildfire and killed a good amount of the population. That really both scared me at the time, and I was already vegetarian at that point, but you would have thought that would have been like a signal to me that maybe I should go vegan sooner, but it takes you a while to process shit. You don't see the information and process it and understand all the implications necessarily when you're younger, or even when you're older. I'm not even gonna age discriminate, because old people don't fucking connect the dots a lot of times. I myself included, so I'm not excluding myself and sitting here high tower. It's just, I wish I had thought more critically about my actions back then, and that's one of the things that I regret from my youth, is that I didn't drop this sooner, because I was an environmentalist. I was going to major in environmental science until I found out we didn't have that major anymore. So I had been learning about how bad animal agriculture is, how close we were to having another global pandemic, and for fuck's sake, in my lifetime, of course it happened. Not nearly, a lot of people died, but it wasn't quite the same as the swine flu. But that had such an impact on me that when I was writing the comic, it went from being a silly little comic about some girl who goes to a shop in a city and discovers a magical fucking animal thing, to being a more serious comic, kind of, that was kind of me trying to work through a lot of the things that were on my mind at the time. In my early days of college, 9/11 had just happened when I was in high school, when I was in my senior year, and we were in the middle of a war when I was in college. So I had the war that was pressing on my mind. Oh, they didn't call it a war. I'm so sorry. It was a quote unquote conflict or some shit. It was a war. So you had that was really in the forefront of my mind. And then you had learning about the swine flu and how very close we were, how it would not take very much for us to have another serious pandemic, combined with things that, as I said earlier, I watched as a kid, The Stand. All of these things were kind of culminating and brewing in my mind. And I think that a lot of that was a lot of me putting that into the story and changing where I was going from high school to college. I think that it was and is me trying to work through some of these major world events that have been painful for me and other people to like think about and grapple with. And much like with the Postman, one of my goals with this story is to have some inkling of hope for people and have an inkling of hope in humanity, which is what I've struggled with my whole life. I love people. I love people. I really do. But I also hate people's actions and how it's impossible for me to help people understand how our actions affect one another and affect ourselves and the people that we love. We think that, oh, what's happening to this group of people doesn't matter because that's not me. I need what I need for me, and I don't care at what cost. I'm going to get it for me. I don't know how to get through to people. I don't know how to reach people. My whole life, this has been one of the things that I've struggled with, is trying to help people help themselves by helping others, because we are not in a vacuum. Everything that happens to anyone else, regardless of if their lifestyle is different from you, if they look different, if they have different views and cultures, it doesn't matter how different they are. Fundamentally speaking, we all have a vested interest in taking care of each other. And so a lot of this comic is going to be kind of stupidly starry-eyed, but also very dark, because it's a culmination of all these things that have been weighing on my mind my whole life, and that sadly we're still dealing with in the present day. And I don't think you'll ever not be dealing with it, which is why it's something that, I think that people need to be hopeful for, but know that you will always have to fight for a better world. There's never an end to protecting our rights and trying to protect each other. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of what was the impetus for a lot of my genre tags with this comic, because it seems like so fucking random, and it is random. It is just a lot of random things. My love of the Beatles, the title Dark Horse, my love of anime and manga, my love of fantasy stories, my love specifically of magical girls. I didn't even touch that subject. I don't need to, because I've talked so much about magical girls on this channel. It's pretty obvious that I've been influenced by magical girl anime and manga and stuff like that. So that's some details about some of the influences on the comic that I work on. We're at the end of the video. I'm going to go ahead and close. I want to thank you for listening. I don't know. I hope that some of the resources that I shared will be helpful to anyone out there. I tried to not just make this video about me and my comic. Obviously, that was like the primary thing that I babbled about. But I hope that throughout the video, if there's anything that, interested you and you thought could benefit yourself, please check them out. I will have it linked down in the description, a lot of the resources that I discussed. Next video is going to be December 11th. And I think it's going to be either a video that is 10 interesting indie webcomics. I might do some from Tapas, from Comic Fury, possibly webtoons, but I don't really read webtoons. Like, I'm subscribed to a lot of comics, and there's like maybe one or two that I keep up with. I don't like their format. I really don't like that I can't use the arrow keys. I'm not gonna read it on my fucking phone. I'm not gonna get the app. I don't care about the app. I don't like apps. Crabby. So, I mean, I might have a webtoon suggestion, but probably not. I'm going to try to give y'all some interesting comics that I've discovered recently, and I try to keep up with, but it's hard since I'm subbed to so many comics. And then the last video of December, the last video of the year, oh my gosh, I don't know what day that's going to be on yet, but you know what? It might be on Christmas Day. And I think it's going to be like my annual fan art video, so that I can show off some gifts that I created, some that I owed, and maybe some that I just wanted to do because I like the comic. So yeah, I think that I've said everything that I wanted to say in this video. Thank you if you watched to this end of the video. I'll be back next time. So peace and love, fare you well, and keep on trucking.